Yeah, you need to check what the third word was and if it's an odd or even number of characters in there.
Yeah, just
And
just you
if
do a
it's
quick
even,
calculation.
you take the second from the left and
Mhm.
start there.
Roland would like to make it so that this is a Saw movie, but featuring you as a podcast guest. And I don't know, man,
Is it
Roland, that's some
is it
weird stuff
the
you're into.
is
Some
it
weird stuff.
the New Jersey Chainsaw Massacre recording? Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland Volt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roland. Oh my goodness. We are in the heat of summer. I suppose whenever we release this might be a little different, but it's beautiful outside. I went for a walk and man, it really rejuvenated my day. What do you do when it's hot outside, Roland? What's your favorite pastime?
I stay inside and have the AC on because I live in a subtropical climate. It's just damn humid. So I like to avoid it because if I'm outside, my new merch, What's Your Baseline merch t-shirt will get
Ooh.
soaked all the time, and nobody wants that.
Well, what's that?
Um,
What's your baseline.com? You can get merch that supports the podcast and also makes you look cool. All right.
yeah, you can. You can. If you want to support the little podcast that could, well, there's your chance. Or buy books. So
Wow, we're already pitching things. We were like 1 minute in, and there's a couple of sales pitches going on. Well,
yeah, that's
I'm
my
gonna say
that's
that let's pivot this towards the things people are actually here for, because we have got a ton of requests for this episode today. I mean, you've read the title of the episode. I'm sure you know why you're here, why we're here, but there is such a hype around AI right now. And frankly, I think we've talked about it in a couple of different episodes. There's not as much knowledge as there is hype. And so instead of asking everyone to go and do their own research, maybe using AI to talk about AI, we're going to help you with today's guest who knows a lot more about the subject than even we do and can give you a little bit more of the realism behind the hype. What actually exists, what's actually functional, what you should be worried about, what you should be excited for, and how we can work in our world of AI. And I'm so excited to introduce him today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Maxwell Smith. Max, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me, Roland and Jam. Appreciate that warm welcome.
oh, you're more than welcome, because we're all influencers now, just to hook back on the other stuff, Don't
Never
know
thought
what
I'd
we're
add that
talking
to the
about. We're
resume.
talking about the hot shit. So that's why we thought we invite you. But hey, to give our guests maybe a little bit an idea who you are and why we invited you in all seriousness, not because of the influencer stuff. But talk a little bit about yourself. So who are you? What have you done and why did we invite you?
Yeah, so wow, there's a million different ways I could take that, and I have a tendency to ramble here, so tell me to shut up if I go a little bit get a little bit too wordy, but
Please.
background in computer science. So I started as a coder, loved coding, one of those left brain individuals, love logic problems and puzzles and things like that. I also love people and think that people in a way are kind of logic puzzles, like why do they do what they do? What makes them tick? What drives them? And so as far as education goes, like I got a degree in computer science and one in cognitive science, how computers work and how people work, right? And I thought, I'm going to do something with robotics with this. Turns out that robotics is more math than the meaty, fun, conceptual stuff that I really liked. So AI is kind of like an awesome niche in between those two, right? Because it's turning the human element into the computer element, or vice versa, depending on how you look at it. Like I said, just been really interested in technology all my life. I've done a lot of different positions in tech, from being a coder to being a product manager, a product marketer, did some competitive intelligence work, did some analyst relations. So all over the tech spectrum. I never got too far from the middle because I really like nerding out on the back end and talking to the devs and keeping up with the latest trends in technology. Um, and one of the things I've kind of learned from that is that you just always need to focus on when you're talking to different people, whether that's a stakeholder at your company, whether that's a customer, whether it's your boss or even your pet. You have to ask yourself, like, what's in it for them, Like what did they want? So with product marketing, it was a lot of what are people that are using our software? What are their challenges and how can we solve for them? And when it's product marketing, it's the people that might not actually be using the software, but they're making a purchase for the company. What's in it for them? Believe me, there's a ton of cool ideas. Like you go up in a cave somewhere and you have this great idea and start just tinkering and developing something. But I find the more you can focus on what people want and really get inside their head, the more effective you're going to be in everything you do. And AI is no different in this regard, right? AI is trying to get into our heads.
No, I love it. And besides the stuff you do for work, I mean, tell me a little bit more about yourself as a person. I know our audience loves to hear a little bit about the backstory of the human being. If we're talking about humans and computers, the human being behind the ideas for today.
Sure, absolutely. So, much like I have this dichotomy going on with computers and people, I'm that way in my personal life as well. So, I really, really love the outdoors. Grew up in middle of nowhere in a cornfield somewhere in Pennsylvania. So, I love hiking, fishing, snowboarding. Recently got scuba certified, and that's super cool. Like being underwater, like breathing underwater is just a phenomenal experience. Like quick plug for anyone who's not scuba certified, do it. You won't regret
Oh
it.
yeah.
But I'm also like I said, a big nerd. So I love building computers. I love PC gaming. I have a VR headset hanging on the wall. Like I got into that before it's getting a little bit of steam now, but like back when it wasn't cool. Um, my whole house is outfitted like a smart home. Like control the blinds, the garage, the sprinklers, the lights. You name it. So yeah, I love nature and I love technology, right? And sometimes you can bring those together, and sometimes they're disparate. Um, but maybe like the most fun fact thing about me, not something I do commonly, but back when I was in high school, me and a bunch of friends built a 25-foot tall trebuchet, which is a siege weapon, where we competed in a competition to launch pumpkins out into a field. It's called Pumpkin Chunkin. And the hosts of Mythbusters were actually there one year. I got to meet them at that event. Um, but yeah, we launched a 6 pound pumpkin 600 feet. So that was pretty cool.
Oh boy. Well, my friend, we want to get into the topic for today, though. I think that we can nerd out forever and ever. The thing we want to nerd out today about is AI. So everyone wants to talk AI, but I don't think people understand where it came from or what it's based off of. They're just saying, "Oh my goodness, overnight, AI has turned from science fiction to reality." But tell me a little bit about the development process of AI. Like what's its foundations? What sort of iterations has it gone through? And why is the AI now not just like a surprise flash in the pan, but like an evolution of what has come before?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe starting off, let's just break down AI for a second. Like, what do those words mean? So I think everybody
Sure.
probably knows stands for artificial and intelligence. And the artificial is probably the easiest part to understand, right? It's non-human. It's created. It's algorithmic. It's not us. It is something else, right? Um, and the intelligence part is where I think the meat of this podcast is going to go, right? Because we want to know like what actually is intelligent, and that's kind of where the needle moves. And if we look at the history, kind of, and where we are, that's how we need to know like how real is this right now? Like how is this being overhyped? Is this like truly a game changer? I think honestly, spoiler alert, the answer is a little bit of both. But in terms of intelligence, it's being able to reason, to say here's an input, could be a question, and here's an output, and that output makes sense. And that could be, like I said, answering a question. It could be drawing a picture. It could be making a video. I think most of us are probably somewhat familiar with Chat GPT at this point, like all the things that it can do, right? And one of the ways that this is in the scientific community, not the gold standard anymore, but what once was kind of the gold standard for determining if something was truly intelligent was called the Turing test. And it basically said if you're interacting with a machine through speech, through natural language, like we do with ChatGPT, and you can't tell the difference in the answers you're getting between a human answering and a computer answering it, or sorry, between a human and computer, it's sufficiently artificially intelligent, right? It passes the Turing test. Um, now, I mean, there's been several renditions of chatbots over the years. I'm sure that those of us that have been around long enough have seen the crashing and burning of some of these agents that kind of go off the rails. I won't mention one
Oh yeah.
specifically, but I think even in the last 2 weeks, we've seen one of the more prevalent agents crashing and burning and saying some pretty ludicrous things.
In the military of all places. Yeah, interesting.
The question is, do we want to be able to detect when this is a machine responding or a human responding? I suppose that's a later thing, but
Yeah.
listen, we know the world of Blade Runner, and even in that science fiction universe, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out whether or not they could detect a replicant, right?
I do have maybe in the same vein. I want to go back to your first statement, Max, where you defined, which I think you didn't, defined artificial and intelligent. I
Mhm.
get the artificial part. It's built, so it's not born, it's not grown, it's whatever. Well, I just read a couple of weeks ago a little pamphlet by some Apple engineers who were of the opinion that what we call AI is actually not intelligent. It's just doing things pretty fast, and it doesn't reason. And they basically warned us for making that false equality of, oh yeah, now computers are like humans because they can think, they can do whatever. um, can you elaborate a little bit more on that intelligence part? Because I tend to agree with the Apple guys. I think what we see today with the LLMs and all that type of stuff is pretty impressive, but it still has its shortcomings and it shows it, right? You just mentioned it, right? While I think if someone is really intelligent or human or both, well, that's rare, uh, then you would have other qualities that a machine currently can't do. So can you elaborate a little bit on your position on that topic?
We'll get to the application of this in a little bit, but let's just nerd out here for a second and dive deep into the concept around it. I would argue that us as humans are just a series of algorithms, right? We have a brain with lots of neurons, and they're just sending electricity and some neurotransmitters here and there back and forth. And that's, in my opinion, everything we are, right? I'm a strict physicalist. Like, if we had the starting set of conditions for the universe and we know basically where everything's going, if we had a perfect science, we could perfectly predict the future. So, humans, as beautiful and as wonderful as they are, like I don't think we're so different than machines, or I don't think the machines are so different than us.
I think there's a quite a difference, because what you assume in my mind is uh the assumption that there's only zeros and one. You have two states. And I think we humans can very well work in ambiguity. We can think future states. We can feel empathy and all that stuff. So analog things. So I think there's a qualitative difference between a two-state, zero and one um, position, and the wetware that every one of us has in their skulls.
So I think that when we think about particularly, so let me just bring up machine learning real quick for those that might not be familiar. When we talk about machine learning, we're basically saying that we have or a machine learning algorithm in particular. We're saying we have an algorithm that says, when you take this input, run the algorithm and give me an output. It is machine learning because it can adjust itself for the set of outputs that you want to be correct. So if we know, for instance, if you're making a predictive model, like let's say you're making a sports betting model for UFC fights or for soccer matches, right? We know all the starting conditions going in. We know the fighters, we know their weight, we know their history, we know whether or not they're ill, we know if they're at elevation fighting or something like that, and we ultimately know on the backside of that who won the fight. So we could make some rudimentary model to say, based on our best guess, we think that probably the most important factor is how well the training camp went, right? How we want to measure that. But we don't know. There's these little hidden variables that actually have a big impact on the outcome of the fight. And so what we say is, here's our base algorithm. Here's the set of information we knew about the fights going in. Here's the set of information we know what the actual result is, and let the algorithm adjust itself over time, slightly modify the parameters to get as close as it can to being able to predict the outcome correctly. And now we have that model, and we can say for a future set of a future fight or bout, right? Here's the input information. What do we predict the outcome to be? So it's that adjustment, it's that learning part that I think is really one of the game changers in the perception of AI. This result, like the idea of machine learning, has been around for decades in mathematics, but we haven't been able to apply it because doing this, particularly with large scale data sets, uses a ton of compute power. And because you hear in the news, right? How much energy is AI using, right? Because to train these large language models across the entire internet and all of the words and language and sentences and blogs and everything else, right? It uses a tremendous amount of compute, but we have that compute now, and so we're able to make this a little bit more applied AI rather than theoretical AI.
Yeah, but
But
hold on.
yeah,
If I remember my Google AI one-on-one class that I did, right?
Mhm.
They made the distinction between I agree, machine learning, generative AI, they're all under the big bucket of AI, but they made the distinction and said, okay, ML is one thing, generative is a different thing because it works differently. I agree with you on the machine learning part, which is uh, classification, pattern detection, iterations on this that you hone into this, right? But when I look, and I'm pretty sure you will talk about this, when I look at the generative AI, well, that works differently, right? It takes words, so speech to text, and then the text thing and transforms it into tokens, and it uses probabilities to figure out what would be the next most probable thing, right? That could then be translated back into text, and um, it will give you an answer. So it's guessing, and that's why we have the hallucinations, right? So I think it works differently, right? And I agree with you that there is some form of learning, if you want to use that human term for, yeah, it by itself iterates and becomes more specific, more fine grained in there. But I think it's a different game in the LLMs, isn't it?
I think it's a little bit different in terms of like the base technology, like how the algorithms actually work. But I think in
Mhm.
theory, they're actually much the same because even the machine learning that I was describing is probabilistic in nature, right? When you have all these
Mhm.
inputs for that fight I was talking about, like it's what is the probability given this variable? How much does that change the overall equation? And in terms of these LLMs, they're not smart, right? They're not using developing some sort of semantic meaning layer of these words. They're just looking at tons of words and the patterns that these words are used in and their relation to
Mhm.
other words. And when they do that token generation, they're guessing at what makes sense. And they've gotten
Yeah.
very good at guessing correctly, right? There is still the
Oh, I
hallucinations, there are
agree.
still the
Yeah, yeah,
problems.
yeah. It's impressive. Yeah.
But back to the us part of the equation, I think I would still argue with you, Roland. I think we're the same way, right? At the end of the day, the individual synapses, the individual neurons, they either fire or they don't. And that pattern of firing or not across the millions of neurons to make a decision, right? That also like that is a one or a zero. Either it fires or it doesn't. And it's that combination of all those firings that lead to these crazy concepts like you and I talking right now. It's all built on these ones and zeros.
Which is really weird, even though we know each other for 1.5 years now, we still talk to each other. I agree with that, you know? Um,
Right.
yeah.
The model seems to be that's moving towards more of a mimicry of how the human brain works. We talk about neural nets or things like that that are a little bit more an extension on this one. But the question here is, when you look at the practical, like the development of productized AI, what are this lineage from the Turing test to we talked to Gen AI, we talked to agentic AI, we talked to like other types of things. What are the ones out there that people need to be aware of? And what are some perspectives and particularly differentiators between how that implementation might affect what people should be considering with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. And I would say that honestly, it's not the name of the AI that you need to necessarily be focused on. They are different, as Roland says. Like at the at its core, generative AI works differently than your standard machine learning algorithm for like some sort of algorithmic problem that you're trying to solve. And agentic AI is just starting to like get its roots now, but Here's the problem with with productized AI, I'd say, is that um, we have marketing. Humans have marketing, tech companies have marketing, and I think what we've seen by and large is everybody, because it increases value to shareholders, it increases valuations, is trying to shove AI on their websites and say everything is AI powered, or just throw these words in. Now we're an agentic AI. They might just be an automation company right now, but they're saying, and I have a very popular one in mind. I won't say it out loud, but you know, a standard automation company, and suddenly now they're an agentic AI company. Like that's their vision. They might get there, but that's not what they are today. So, um, you should be on the lookout for all of it. There's a purpose for all of it. There is a use for generative AI. There's a use for agentic AI. There's a use for personalized assistants and automations, the co-pilots and the likes of that. And there's a use for classic machine learning AI to predict outcomes. Um, but what's important is understanding not how do I classify this AI, but is this AI useful to me? And so there's a couple questions that I might ask to kind of come to that decision. Um,
I think there's a place for different types of automation, right? It sounds a little bit as if it's inevitable, the world will go down that AI path and we must be number one, blah, blah. I think there's still room for other types of automation. When you think about the uh, no code, no code guys who just want to have a quick mini workflow to solve their urgent problem right now, or you want to scale it up because you need to meet regulatory requirements and make goddamn sure that step one comes before step two, it comes before step three, because the pill that you're producing will kill other people if you don't follow the 1, 2, 3 step. Um, I think there's more for it, and I think my uneasy feeling is this gets all pushed in the background, right? So let me ask you from your product marketer perspective, how do you see that? Because I also see oh yeah, we're AI driven, we're AI first, we're AI, right? So the water gets muddied, but I would love to hear your professional opinion on that. And if you see this continuing and that's just the new reality that we see in marketing, or do you think it will um, tone down a little bit going forward and people will see, oh yeah, there's different ways to skin a cat?
yeah, I will say that I'm purely speculating, right? I'm giving my
Of
somewhat
course.
educated
Yeah.
opinion, but I can't predict the future any better than anyone else, or else I'd probably be rich at this point. So I think it will continue, but I think it will start to specialize and become meaningful in like right now it's kind of like AI is here all over the place and like generative AI is here, agentic AI, we're knocking on the doorsteps. We're trying different things to see where it has value. We're not really saying like here's a specific problem that we're trying to solve. We're still in we have a really cool tool. Society, go figure out how this is going to be used. So I think we're going to specialize a little bit. I will say that I think it's here to stay as like a core part of the technology stack of business and society at large. In the way that like automation hasn't gone away, it's become more refined, and now there's different types of automation and so on and so forth. So I think one of the things about AI uniquely that might be differentiated for some of the other technologies, and particularly enterprise technologies that I think everyone listening to this podcast is familiar with, is it has such a personal touch. It's breached the corporate layer into the at home layer, right? Like ChatGPT, for better or worse, and for as good or as bad as you think it is, like it's everywhere. Like kids are using ChatGPT. It's completely rewritten the landscape around education. Like, what is plagiarism? Like, how do we detect plagiarism accurately? As a product marketer, even like I resisted this for a long time myself because, you know, I thought I have the vision, I have the language, I have the positioning that I want. Like, I want to do it exactly my way. And do I think ChatGPT can do it as good as me? Absolutely not. Do I think it can get 75% of the way there and like you just need the human to get it across the line? Like absolutely. And you know, because people are interacting with it and can kind of understand it in a way that like they might not understand automation in their personal life the same way that it works in the corporate world. Like I think that alone is going to give AI some staying power that can't be ignored or is I still think it's a bit overhyped, but I don't think it is a flash in the pan and is going to go away anytime soon. I think we are going to see AI in particularly the marketing of companies for quite some time, and I think some are going to do well, some are going to flounder. And like I said, as we specialize the use of AI, that's where the winners and losers are going to be made.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting from my perspective when you look at like very few tools have truly crossed the barriers between enterprise, corporate, and personal. Like, when's the last time you did your like home finances on SAP? Like that would make no sense. And that's the thing that astounds me about AI is the profound scalability of the platform. It seems like as a technology, it's the implementation of an idea that could be as big or as small as you need it to be, and your interface is what matters to you, which I think is a pretty cool conversation starter because the intuitive nature with which you use it is in some part of its value. Like,
Oh,
yes, it's powerful, but it's also the getting to that power requires so many fewer mental steps than a lot of the platforms that I've used in my lifetime. Like, that's incredibly valuable.
I think I disagree, JM. I think we've seen
Really?
that pattern. Yeah, we've seen that pattern before, right? You as a private person most likely have a better laptop, a better phone, a better whatever than what your employer gives you. I think what we see is the I don't know, inefficiency, dysfunctionality, whatever, put your word of choice in there of corporate IT that they can't catch up with. That's why we have shadow IT and all those things. And I think it's a similar pattern that we now see with the tools, because it gets marketed to consumers, right? Hey, yours truly is using it for translation things, but don't tell anyone, right? And is surprised how good the result is if it wouldn't cut half of my book. But anyways, so
Well,
it's
that was the garbage half anyways, Roland. Don't worry about it. No, no, but I get your point, and I think I want to just take a pause here because we've been talking a lot back about sort of the foundations of AI and what it's valued to. I want to turn this around on our audience. Do you use AI in your normal daily life? What have you found it useful for augmenting, replacing? What challenges have you seen from it? And as you start to talk about its use in your life as an employee, where do you see it being introduced at your company, and how's that been going? We'll leave you for a moment and have you think about those things and come back with our second section, a more in depth look at how AI hype turns into AI value.
and welcome back. Max, very interesting. I think we need to talk more about this over a glass of milk at some point in time in person. But I'd like to switch topics a little bit because, and I alluded to it a little bit. Oh, AI here, AI first, AI. You know, I think there's still a lot of AI greenwashing, AI washing out there. Um, how do you see through those attempts of whatever astonishing the bias of your product, even though you haven't built in anything or just a tiny little bit to be the greatest tool vendor in the world? So how do you, as the consumer, as the user of tools, as the person in architecture departments making decisions, should we choose tool one or tool two? Should we use whatever, this model or that model? How do you see through that admittedly confusing bunch of information?
I would say when you're asking yourself, does this vendor's use of AI actually move the needle for me? There's three questions that I would probably ask to kind of see through or see into, depending on which way it goes. And these questions actually aren't that different from many other things that are heavily marketed at a point in time. I haven't stretched this to every edge case, but I think that these three questions probably always apply for things that are in the marketing hype cycle. The first and the most important one is, does it help you achieve your goal? And to answer that question, you need to know what your goal is. And generally speaking, I would say if you're going into something without a specific goal, and just getting something because it is shiny.
Yeah, we
That
can
is a
stop here. Nobody has any goals. Yeah, that's really a problem if you don't have that. I agree.
yes. So does it help you achieve your goal? And this goes back to when I was talking about my experience in product marketing and product management. What does your dog want? What does your boss want? What do your stakeholders want? Like, what are you trying to do? And it's usually in terms of either like increasing productivity in some way, reducing cost, or like maintaining compliance. Those are kind of like the big three business goals, and they break down into different KPIs and so on and so forth. But really lock in and say, like, why are we getting this tool? Like, what is it we're trying to achieve? And forget that they're talking about AI at all for a second. Like, what does their software actually do? What does it help you achieve? And are the KPIs that they're saying the AI helps drive, are those the KPIs that you actually care about, right? And this is in my mind somewhat obvious, but like really sit down and like write it out, because I have seen, unfortunately, too many times in the business world, like uh that attention to detail doesn't actually happen, and it winds companies up in some pretty unsavory places, unfortunately. Um, then once you've said, okay, this company is about what we're about, helping us what we're trying to achieve, then if specifically for AI washing, one of the questions that I like to ask myself is what AI is doing for their software something that I could kind of reason through myself? And this is particularly for those machine learning algorithmic predictive models that I was talking about before, not so much for the generative AI, but also for the agentic AI. I think it would apply there. Because if you think about like simple automation, right? It is just a set of what if statements and rules. If this thing happens, then I want this thing to happen. Or if this thing happens, now we need to make this decision. And depending on this decision, we need to make this decision. And then ultimately, pay this invoice, shove this thing in Excel, go to the moon, whatever it is, right? And you could argue that that's artificial intelligence, right? Like, it is a set of codified rules that much like a person would think through in their intelligence, you make a decision based on information that you have, um, right? But that isn't really AI. That's a statistical model. That's a simple rule set. We've seen this forever. So there are some companies, and I think the market is getting more wise, but I still see it out there. These companies that just have some pretty primitive automation, and they're considering triggers to be artificially intelligent, right? My basic question is, if this is something that I could reason through myself, if what their AI is doing is something that I, Max Smith, could reason through and say, yeah, this is the decision making process I would use to get from this input to this output, it's not, it's probably not really AI, right? This needs to be one of those puzzles where, and going, you can probably tell I'm a UFC fan. Going back to the fight model example here, using my best reasoning, I am not going to accurately be able to predict the outcome of a fight, right? There are just too many variables and too much complexity with how the variables interact with each other and what weight you should give each variable. And like, that model can only be built through something like machine learning, right? Like, I know what we're trying to achieve. I know what the goal is. I know what our KPI is, right? Can I predict the winner of this fight correctly? But I have no idea how to get there consistently and routinely. And like, answering that question means, yes, this AI is doing something that is like truly AI and not something that is just some rules-based statistical model that I could get somewhere else.
A level of complexity where the AI interface truly like represents a human augmentation. Whereas,
Well,
if I, it's, the thing I like to say is like, if you could do this yourself, but it takes longer, then there's marginal value, right? But if you can't, if it could not be done as easily or even at all by a human, given the
I
number of variables to consider,
no, I
that's
disagree,
something that you
JM.
need a tool like that.
I disagree, because what you're referring to is, and Max, I come back to you in a minute. What you're referring to is the pure volume of stuff, right? That's why we have RPA for, right?
But
Oh,
complexity of stuff.
but there's a gazillion of data records, and no human in a reasonable time can go through them, right? So that's why you have automation. Max, to your point, um, I think this, and we will have an episode, spoiler alert, the next one, talking about AI automation and all those things. I think you still can um, algorithmically automate with AI, right? Because you would have the simple retrieval questions, and we will talk about that. We built a little demo for some poor soul who needs to update IT systems to their latest version. And then they were looking at the NIST catalogs and looking for vulnerabilities and prioritize and all this. So they did the legwork, right? But it was an AI doing this, right? Because the AI needed to be smart enough to look up at the right place and not just following simple logic, do one, do two, do three. I think the difference then what we see to agentic AI is that you treat it like a black box. And here comes the professional deformation, you know. It's a process step in a process where you don't know what the parameters of that process step are. You just want to see the outcome. Oh, this thing is accomplished. In my little example, oh, there's a list on Google Sheets that gives me a sequence of which applications I need to upgrade because they're the most vulnerable. But we don't really care how that list was created. And I think this is where the big danger comes in, because from a philosophical perspective, because how much do you manage your process if you don't know what's happening in there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you don't know what's going on and you're throwing technology at that problem, I don't care if it's AI, I don't care if it's automation, I don't care what it is. If you don't know what's going on and you don't have some level of mastery over your process, you are probably not going to get the intended result. You are probably throwing gasoline on a fire. If I
Yeah,
had to
you
guess.
do stupid stuff faster. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
But it has a slight twist, right? Because you know that I disagree. But assume the AI is intelligent, and now I have the
Mhm.
Terminator scenario in the back of my mind. If we don't know what we're doing and we just leave it unchecked, right, and it does its thing, well, when does Asimov kick in? The three rules of robotics. So it's an ethical question that comes up, right? I remember lively the conversation years ago in Germany, between, I think it was Mercedes engineers. The scenario was your self-driving car um, cannot avoid an accident. So do you run over the grandmother who walks over the pedestrian walkway, or do you run over the little kids on the other side of the thing? Or, and that was not the option, do you just drive the car off the bridge and drown your driver? Right.
Yeah,
So how do
the
you
trolley problem applied to AI. I
yeah, how do you
understand.
solve that problem?
Will Smith's trauma in the movie I, Robot, it's that
Yeah,
decision
Oh
the
making
yeah. Yeah,
future.
process
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
haunts
Yeah.
him
Yeah,
throughout the
yeah.
film.
The other piece of the puzzle here that I want to talk about is whether or not AI actually works. So I have one of my customers who's very interested in testing out the responses from retrieval augmented generation AI with them just looking through the data set and finding that information themselves. And the accuracy of AI is a big concern for a lot of companies. And if you say, "Oh, we just do it with AI," but the AI itself is probabilistically and not really with enough reasoning to reliably return results, providing information confidently, that seems to me like a big red flag for a technology implementation where the company's not really ready to deploy in that fashion.
But they are confident. That's the big challenge. All those answers that you get are super confident. This is
They
how it
prob-
works, dear
they
user,
say
right?
they're
And
confident.
and
That's the
no, no,
question.
no, no, no. When you read it, but the point is, the users are lazy. They just believe it. They don't poke holes in there, right? I think that's what Max wants to get to, right? To say, hey, does it really work? You know?
Yeah, so I think I'd actually split this into finishing up with the point I was making, and then I think this is actually a great segue into the next like set of things I want to talk about in the AI washing saga. So again, three questions: does it help you achieve your goal? Is this something you could reason through yourself to figure out if it's actually AI? And then the third, as Roland and JM have both said, does it actually work? And I think the important thing here is you have to test it in your real world environment. Uh, a lot of these vendors that are productized AI, they want to show you the super cool demo that, you know, in the worst case, they're malicious and they hard code something in the background to make the answer work and look intelligent, even though it isn't. And in the best case, it does actually work, but it's limited to work on the set of data that they're providing for the demo. So absolutely demand some sort of proof of concept, proof of value, make it work on your data, make sure it actually works in the infrastructure, make sure AI is delivering something that is valuable. Like you have to see that before signing on. And if they are hesitant to give that to you, I think that it is not a complete showstopper red flag, but that is a pretty crimson looking flag to me if I can say so myself.
How to which degree yeah, to which degree would you recommend, in production, not just the POC, right? But in production, to which degree would you recommend that there's a human checking, and even if it's just spot checking the results? Or do you say, "Oh, you got your POC, it works, I can go home and have a pina colada." What is your recommendation in that scenario?
So I don't think you could have teed up what I want to talk about next any better. Like I could have like
Oh,
told you what to say and it wouldn't have been any better. So let's assume we've answered these three questions and there is something here and the vendor is using or like has a legitimate use of AI that could legitimately benefit your company, right? So now we get to the fun part of executing it and the cultural change around it and all that fun change management work that comes with any new application of technology. And to your question, I answer your question, Roland, with another question, or rather, I give our audience a question they should once again ask themselves, which is what is your acceptable margin of error? This is one of the biggest pitfalls with AI because it really depends. You know, if I am creating again, some sort of data sheet or writing a blog and I am using ChatGPT to help me write that blog, if there's a small grammatical error, if the positioning isn't 100% what we want to put out, like no big deal. No one's dying as a result of that.
mhm,
If you're using a
literally.
model to determine should this insurance claim be paid out or should it be rejected, or if you're using a model to say, should I approve this mortgage to someone, or if you're using a model to say, should I make this medical decision for someone's therapeutic care, those are
Uh-huh.
much, much more important ways where I think, first of all, AI can be a massive value add. It absolutely can be. There is just simply reasoning, particularly in the medical community, for novel therapeutics and for sequences of care that we can only get to probably with AI. Or if we got to it as humans, it would take hundreds, if not thousands of years to get to that level of expertise. Like, I'm not saying that it's not real and useful. It very much is, even if we're in the infancy of it. But you have to be sure that the margin of error that you're willing to accept is a margin of error that you're willing to accept. And if it is something like medical specifically, like I think you need to bring your patients on board. Like I think as we look at the regulatory landscape, like we need to make sure that they know and they sign up and they say, look, I know that you can't exactly explain to me, like you can give me some broad strokes of why you're doing this, but you can't exactly do it. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but that is diagnosis. You know, you use it to whatever, go through scans, to find cancer cells or whatever, right? There's still a doctor at the end who looks at the result and say, "Yeah, I agree with that." Right?
Well, not necessarily, Roland. In the case of like fully autonomous AI, like in terms of self-driving cars,
Yeah,
the
that's
driver is supposed to be
yeah, that
checking it, or the doctor is supposed to be checking it, but we see the movement
hold on.
towards
Hold on. Let me
unmonitored AI, and then
J
the question
JM,
is comes who's liable for that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, let me go in the stable so that I get my high horse now. So I think, to be quite honest, I think, and now I might out myself as the old person in there. I think one of the most stupidest ideas that humanity had was self-driving cars. I'm all for all those automated bling bling, your steering wheel is wobbling, it brakes itself, whatever, assisted
Bling bling,
technology.
your
Yeah,
steering wheel
bling
is
bling, yes.
wobbling. That would you describe as autopilot for
What you no, no,
cars?
no, 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 what you no, no, I mean all those assistants, right? All those assistive systems. I'm all for it. But but you, JM, as a person, you decide to hop in your car and drive from A to B. You are responsible. Responsibility cannot be divided.
My car company told me it was driving me, and I'm currently checking my phone or I'm playing a game. Who is liable in case I get in a crash? And that's a question back to you, Maxwell. What are some thoughts about like liability? Like, where is the market, and particularly where are insurers on the liabilities associated with the use of AI that results in negative outcomes?
So I hold two conflicting opinions that I really haven't like honestly settled entirely inside myself. Um, there is part of me that says we're letting this go too far too fast, and there's not nearly enough regulation that is preventing bad outcomes from happening. Like, we absolutely should require some level of explainability or some level of being able to stand by why an algorithm is making a decision as it's making, so that, for instance, groups that have been historically marginalized. Sorry, if I just go back a second, like a small sidestep. I was talking about the fight model, right? And we talk about the inputs and the outputs. If we look at the inputs and the outputs historically for things like approving claims, I think we know, if we're being honest with ourselves, that marginalized groups have been getting the short end of the stick historically. So if you're trying to mimic history, if that is your input data set, right, whether it was intentional or not, right, and I don't even need to like have a claim there to make the point I'm making, you are going to build an algorithm that is going to perpetuate that, uh, that, I don't know what the word oppression is, like way too strong of a word here, but it's going to perpetuate that prejudice, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so that's deeply problematic, right? And I think with all these uses of AIs, particularly as it pertains to decision making for important things like insurance or mortgages or getting a car or credit or medical diagnoses or whatever, we stand a real risk of, if we move too fast, like bad things are going to happen, and we're actually going to accelerate, again, throwing gasoline on the fire, like make some of these problems worse, even if we truly want to make them better. Um, at the same token, I kind of feel like the reason we don't have self-driving cars is because we can't get out of our own litigative tendencies and ways, right? Because we haven't answered the
Sure.
question. If it crashes, is it the company that makes the software inside the computer? Is it the company that built the sensor that got the inaccurate reading? Is it the person behind the wheel? Is it the owner of the car company themselves, even if they brought in all the components and just put them together in the car, but they're not actually responsible for any of the base manufacturing? And because we can't agree on who gets sued when something goes wrong, like I personally don't believe that the technology is that far off from being able to work at a level higher than humans, right? Humans mess up, humans cause accidents all the time. So it's not can is the acceptable level like perfect, like no accidents with self-driving cars? Is it less than the human element currently? And I think we're probably close, if not better, with self-driving cars. So in that sense, I'm like, one corner of my mouth, I'm like, we need more regulation. Other corner of my mouth, I'm like, can we just decide who's responsible and get some cool stuff with AI? Like, what are we doing here?
It's a scary question, but a super simple answer. The scary question is, how many dead people are we as a society willing to accept because we're sending half-baked software into self-driving cars? Right?
How m
1,
how
Yeah.
200,
how many
2,000?
but how many
Hold
are we
on.
willing to accept by sending half-baked humans into cars that,
Oh,
like.
yeah, that's why the subway was invented. They
If you're
should
half
drive a
baked, that's
subway.
considered
But
DUI, right? That's half
hold on,
baked.
Right,
hold on, hold
exactly.
on, hold on.
Like,
But
we're allowing people to drive knowing that they can consume alcohol and get behind the
I'm
wheel,
with
right?
you. I'm 100% with you. That again, this is why the subway was invented. But the point is it neglectance to JM's point, right? If he says, "Oh, I have that fancy self-driving cars, and now I take my phone and I dabble on my phone because I be safe. The car is taking care of me." Right? And my opinion on this is UJM made the decision to hop in that car to drive from A to B. You are responsible for everything that happens between A and B.
Are you responsible in the airplane even though there's a pilot flying it? You made the decision to get on the plane. Something else is driving it. It's another human. It's not a system, but
You're just being meat packed as a passenger. You're the cargo.
We're also choosing a very straightforward example. A part of my history is I actually worked on an early stage startup with AI around cancer care in more than a decade ago. And I thought to because, at that time I had cancer in the family and I was like, this would be a really cool thing to use a large model for analyzing multivariates. It was something like 64 different variables we were looking at that created a giant butterfly model. guy who runs it, really nice guy, sold his company after many years. I didn't end up working with him permanently, but it was a really cool, interesting explanation of how AI, early AI, could, once again, compute power is a problem, but could use that to drive patient treatment regimens based off of evidence. But the truth was, and the truth is with this sort of thing, it's a learning model. So you get a lot of information, and then some people suffer in order to learn. But that's also kind of how people do medicine. And so the problem, and I think exactly to your point, we couldn't get past the some people will suffer because of technology problem, even though we pointed out people suffer because of no technology and we accept that, or people suffer because of standard practices and in far greater numbers, and we accept that because it's the way it's been done. And nobody chooses to go in for cancer care. That is something that occurs to them. And so in this situation, nobody chooses to be a learning moment for a medical institution. But by the very nature of our discipline, we are. But what if that was incorporated into a larger model that could use that in a better way? We couldn't get that done in 2013 or whatever, because there was so much resistance against it. I'm wondering whether or not the appetite today, and particularly when I look at examples of like the widespread use of ChatGPT, the trust in that at a consumer level, the widespread acceptance of different forms of AI automation at a industrial level are starting to open up the possibilities of seeing this as a practice change for our society rather than a technology that is intruding in on our processes.
My personal take is it's probably generational. Um, I'm not sure how many people that were opposed to the idea of uh, going along with the technology and AI made decision are going to change, even if they're big proponents of ChatGPT today. But I think the people that are growing up with things like generative AI that treat it like gospel are probably going to be much more likely in the future. And again, just I don't have any data to back that up. That is purely speculation on my part. I'm not going to claim to be the expert here, but that's my opinion.
So now I want to take it to the practical for our audience here. Like we waxed poetic, we've given great information and background. Let's say that you want to more seriously consider how you can introduce AI safely, sustainably, with the right value cases to your organization. Where would you start looking, and how would you tap into things like a budget around innovation within your organization to try and do the right thing, the right approach towards the introduction of AI? Asking those questions, but also who do you gather? Where do you get that funding from? And ultimately, how do you deliver value with this as an early model?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it in some ways goes back to the questions we asked ourselves when we were deciding, is this company actually good for us as an AI company? Now we've said yes. How do we make it happen? Um, but back when you answered the question, how does this help you achieve your goal? You've already started answering the question of who you need to get involved. Like, who does this benefit? Who cares about the outcome that the AI is providing? And it might, depending on what level of the organization you're applying AI, whether it's a more niche use case or whether it is something more holistic for the organization, that it might have an impact on top line revenue. You might have someone like a CEO that cares, or it might be a CMO, or even just like a head of product marketing, because like you want your product marketers to generate content faster, right? And you're just going with some sort of generative AI chat GPT look. And so where you're going to get the budget for that and the sponsorship really depends on the use case that you're using AI for. But if you've already asked yourself, what are we trying to do with this, and have a good answer there, I think you're going to know who you need to go to, or at least it should illuminate it at that point. I think also that's kind of like the positive side of it, like what's going to help elevate the excitement internally. What's going to stop it in its tracks is the question that we just did wax poetic about for quite a bit, which is what's our acceptable margin of our error? What are we using this for? What happens if it goes wrong? What are the regulatory concerns? So there is going to be like, obviously legal is going to be a big part of any AI decision, right? What's your policy for using AI within the company? I've seen a lot of companies that say you can't actually use a chat GPT or one of those assistants to help create content, particularly if they're using that data to train their LLM. So legal is gonna like this is not something you want to find out later. This is definitely bring legal along in the beginning, like make them comfortable with it. Don't make them defensive. Say, this is what we want to do. How do we do it appropriately? And you're going to have much better success. Um, and maybe just like one more thing there in terms of getting the buy-in is, and I personally don't like that this is happening, but it is. And so maybe you can use it to your advantage. Some companies do just have like an AI budget. I said it's best practice not to say just go get a shiny tool and figure out the use of it later. But there are some companies that at the highest levels of leadership, they believe we are going to lose, we are going to fall behind if we do not start implementing AI in our business model in some way, shape, or form. We don't know what way, shape, or form that is, but here's a sack of cash that we're going to use to try to figure it out. And so maybe you have another goal in mind as a business. Like you want to fix something like very specific, again, maybe one of those more niche use cases, but maybe you can tap into that budget. So even outside of your organization, you don't have to have an opportunity cost conversation because it's coming from someone else's budget. Maybe look around, see if you have one of those inside your company. See if anybody's heard anything about that, or if you've heard of other people doing AI pilots or trying it different ways. That might be useful for if you're an individual contributor or maybe a middle manager in a specific department and you're trying to convince your particular executive leader to invest. If the cash is somewhere else, that's typically a no-brainer.
That's a good point, Max. But I also do have another question. I find it so interesting that this episode is called AI Hype, and we have not spoken about um, the Gartner Hype Curve. And I'm pretty sure all of our listeners are familiar with that. And I just looked at the AI Gartner Hype Curve for 2025. And when you remember, there's that steep growth, high expectations, and then it flips and it goes down into that valley of despair. They have a different
Trough
term
of
for it.
disillusionment.
Thank you. All those fancy words. And then it goes back up and it levels out on hopefully on a higher productivity level. So what they saw in that, and I will put the graphic in the show notes, they saw that we're on that downward thing. So the high expectations for base AI technology is basically over, right? I think people get now 2 years after, or 2.5 years after ChatGPT, they get a grasp around, okay, what is it, right? But they also recommend, get your basics in order. And from that perspective, I really like your idea. I really like the guy who says, here's a pot of gold, go spend it, right? Try to find something meaningful that we could use for our use case here, right? But also, and I like the recommendation that Gartner has, but also start with the fundamentals. And you actually have a question on our little cheat sheet that you haven't answered or asked, as a secondary question, which is, how does your data look like? And I think this is the biggest concern or the biggest pile of manure that I see in organizations. They have no idea about what their data is, right? And as they say, garbage in, garbage out. So can you elaborate a little bit around the data topic before we close out that episode?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's as simple as the vendor that is productizing the AI only knows what they know, and they have only been able to train for instance, for a generative AI model, the underlying large language model, they've only been able to build that on what they have access to. And so it is quite good at, again, doing things like generating stories or narratives because it's looked at millions of blogs and writing and research papers and understands how to structure those conceptually. But if you're a business like an insurance company and you're trying to understand, can we use AI to help adjudicate our claims faster? Obviously, a lot of that information about the adjudication process relies on the data that you have about your customers, relies on the data that you have about the individual claims and cases and the reason that it exists in the first place. And so it's not enough to say hey, here's what the answer should look like. We know that when you ask this question, we want to say, yes, you should reject that claim. We're X% confident, whatever. That's the right structure. But to get the numbers, to fill in the blanks, it relies on your data. And so this is where we could probably spend a whole episode on this. I'm not gonna dive deep, but there's a lot of questions for can they access your data in a meaningful way? Can it merge with the existing model in a meaningful way? And there are a lot of secondary vendors is the wrong word, but there's a lot of niche AI vendors that are trying to solve that problem of integrating the larger, broader scale LLMs with your specific data. Can it be integrated? Does your data exist in a way that even if it can be integrated, it's useful? And that's your point, Roland. Garbage in, garbage out. Like if you can't even answer the questions yourself because you can't find the information internally, how are you going to feed that information to a model that's then going to give you a better answer, right? And then third, what are the regulatory concerns around it? Right, because there's all kinds of confidentiality, patient privacy, whatever it is. And again, could spend a whole thing about the regulation on this topic, but that is one of the areas of concern as well is, are you allowed to use AI?
Yeah, not only that, there's also, and I don't want to start that conversation, being an author and a content creator, I'm still waiting for my paycheck from the Metas and Open AIs and Googles of the world, So the topic of copyright, I didn't give my consent to it, so why should they profit from it? But I agree with you, Max. That might be a complete different conversation about it. I'm just rooting for the New York Times in this case.
Roland always needs to bring up his book. Don't worry, it's a standard thing for every podcast. We are obliged to mention that his book. But we also need to
No, we're not.
put the full text available online so that all your LLMs can scrape them, and suddenly you don't need to read his book. You can just ask ChatGPT. Well, I think the part of this is the packaging of things and packaging things in a way that is useful to the customer. I was asked a while ago about my thoughts on the future of this, and I thought, one of the big things about these AI solutions are we're looking at more tailoring of solutions rather than sort of generic solutions which are operating today at scale that is very consumer available, but is not in any way proprietary to customer. That's not going to be competitive. And I think our future looks a lot more, at least from my perspective, a lot more tailored, a lot more specific AI, and that specific artificial intelligence gives you the results you need to know about what you are doing right now in a way that is very easily verifiable. And I keep stealing the phrase that my wife likes to say, like, you can't use AI that you cannot yourself validate the results with. And specific AI is something that your domain knowledge expertise is valuable in ensuring that what you're getting at the other end makes sense. And I think that makes sense point is a good point to pass this back to our audience. Because where have you used AI and run into some challenges? Have you found challenges within your organization and acceptance within yourself and your community with an acceptance of AI? What helped to break through that barrier of doubt? Or are you still a skeptic like Roland about the regulatory obligations associated with AI or the liabilities associated with AI? And if you could have your druthers and an AI with a perfect confidence, what would your nirvana state look like? We'll leave you for a moment to think about those wonderful things, and we'll come back with our conclusions for the episode and a farewell to Max.
And welcome back. That was a fascinating conversation. I think a little bit stirring the pot in between as well, because I noticed that we have quite different opinions on things. I still think there's a reason why the subway was invented, but we can discuss that over a bowl of milk after the recording. But let me do a mini summary, and I don't want to repeat all the stuff that we said, but just from a bullet point perspective. So we spoke about a little bit about AI, what it is, how it's structured, how it came into our life. But I think the more interesting question was, how do I detect AI washing? And Max, I really liked your 3 questions. Does it help you to achieve the goal? Is it something you could reason through yourself? And does it actually work? And then when you think about that, there's a second set of questions that you have. Do you have the people to support the rollout? How does your data look like? And the point that we discussed ad nauseum, what's your acceptable margin of error? I really loved the episode, and I'm pretty sure there's tons of people out there who want to continue the conversation with you. So My question to you, Max, is how can people reach you?
Probably the easiest way is on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah, it's like 99% of our guests. So I will put your profile on the show notes.
And you can use LinkedIn AI to write those posts now. Isn't that what they say is now available for you? I wonder how much that's a little watching too. But talking about the fun times, you know what's not written by AI? Probably most of our website at whatsyourbaseline.com. Roland is a skeptic, has kept it all fresh and clean with his original thoughts and our original episodes of the What's Your Baseline podcast, and everything on EA and BPM and AI as we investigate and demystify the industry that we have. Well, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you again, Maxwell, for coming along with us. Thank you to our audience for staying all the way to the end of the show. If you like what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, all the good things you do to help our algorithm. You can even leave us a comment on our LinkedIn, and we could respond to those. And in fact, a lot of the shows we do today are built out of comments from listeners like you that spurred on an interest we'd like to see answered by an industry expert. But until the next time, friends, I've been J.M. Merlinson.
I'm Max Smith.
And my name is Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.